Tula Bahadur BK is a health worker in Rasua, Nepal, and on Wednesday morning he watched an entire river valley disappear. "There is devastation everywhere we look," he told Reuters. A survivor nearby described clinging to a mango tree, watching the house where he'd been working simply vanish beneath the water. Security cameras at the Geelong Port border facility captured the moment a 6-story building was completely swallowed within seconds. Dozens of people running for their lives in the frame, just before the footage cuts to nothing but mud. This happened on August 26, 2026, along the Nepal-Tibet border, and as of the most recent count, at least 165 people are confirmed dead. More than 1,000 remain missing, and rescue helicopters still can't land in some of the hardest-hit areas. What caused it wasn't rainfall, and it wasn't an earthquake, even though the U.S. Geological Survey initially thought it was. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happened in the Himalayas this week, the genuine scientific detective work that revealed the real cause, and why researchers who study this exact region say the world has been systematically underestimating this specific kind of disaster for years. No exaggeration, just what NBC News, Reuters, the USGS, and the scientists studying this event directly are confirming right now. If you want to keep following this disaster as search and rescue efforts continue, subscribe and turn on notifications. A thumbs up helps this critical information reach more people who need it. Let's get into it. Let's start with the actual sequence of events, because piecing together what happened this week required genuine scientific detective work, and understanding that process is central to understanding this disaster. At 8:03 August 26th, seismometers across the region picked up a signal. Initial reports, including Nepal's own early assessment, suggested an earthquake had struck, one strong enough to potentially destabilize a glacier and trigger everything that followed. The USGS's own preliminary reading even classified it that way at first, a magnitude 4.4 earthquake. But according to the USGS's own subsequent statement, additional analysis of nearby seismic stations, long-period seismic waves, and satellite imagery led investigators to a different, more precise conclusion. This wasn't an earthquake that triggered a landslide. The landslide itself was the earthquake. The seismic energy detected that morning was generated directly by a massive body of glacial rock and ice collapsing, and by the debris flow that followed immediately afterward. That distinction matters enormously, and it's worth understanding exactly how scientists actually figured this out. According to detailed reporting on the event, geologist Dave Petley, who runs the widely respected Landslide blog and has studied Himalayan disasters extensively, confirmed that this catastrophic debris flow was triggered by the collapse of a glacier high in the mountains. Researcher Dan Sugar posted satellite imagery from Planet Labs directly showing the initiating event, video evidence capturing the actual moment the glacier failed. Nepal's own national disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority confirmed this same finding, stating that an initial study of that satellite imagery indicated a landslide of ice and rock had triggered a debris-laden flood specifically in the Lenda River, located roughly 12 miles northeast of the Nepal-China Rasuagadi border crossing. The location itself deserves real attention because it explains why this disaster's human toll became so catastrophic so quickly. According to the USGS, the collapse occurred near the border of Nepal and China, roughly 34 miles northwest of Kodari, Nepal, in Nepal's Rasua district, an area with a population of approximately 50,000 people scattered across small mountain towns and villages built directly along the river valleys draining down from the high Himalayas. Once that glacier collapsed, the resulting debris flow, a violent mixture of ice, rock, mud, and water, surged directly down the Potakoshi River and into the Trishuli River system, funneling with tremendous force through exactly the narrow populated valleys those communities call home. The footage that emerged from this disaster genuinely captures the speed and violence of what actually happened on the ground. Surveillance video from the Rasuagadi border crossing, verified directly by NBC News, shows crowds trying to flee a surging wall of mud with nowhere left to go, the wave hitting them with what reporters described as horrific force. Rows of buses and trucks parked nearby were swept aside like toys, according to that same coverage. Bridges cracked apart and were carried away entirely by the raging, debris-choked water. At the Geelong port facility specifically, on the Tibet side of the border, security cameras captured a 6-story building being completely consumed by the mud within seconds, with dozens of people visible running for their lives in the frame moments before the footage simply ends. Let's talk about the human toll, because it's climbed steadily and significantly since the disaster first struck, and it's worth understanding the specific numbers as officials have confirmed them. According to the most recent reporting, at least 165 people have been confirmed dead, with 157 bodies specifically recovered as of the most recent count. But the number that genuinely defines the scale of this disaster right now is the missing count. Rescue teams are currently searching for more than 1,000 people reported missing across the affected region. Nepal's tourism ministry specifically confirmed that 468 tourists, 393 of them foreign nationals, remained unaccounted for a full day after the disaster struck, with separate reporting specifying that around 340 foreigners, including tourists from the United States, Australia, Britain, and Canada, were among those missing. Rasuwa sits along a popular trekking and border crossing route between Nepal and Tibet, which explains why so many international visitors were caught directly in the disaster's path. It's worth understanding why the missing count remains so high and so difficult to resolve, because it reflects genuine, ongoing logistical challenges facing the rescue response right now. According to officials, rescue helicopters could not land in some of Nepal's hardest-hit areas specifically, including the towns of Sayaprabesi and Timur. Precisely the kind of access problem we've discussed in previous coverage of disasters striking remote, mountainous terrain, where the same event responsible for the initial destruction also destroys the roads, bridges, and communication infrastructure rescuers would otherwise use to actually reach survivors. Rescuers have been described wading directly through mud and sludge, searching for anyone trapped, with floodwaters having buried the lower floors of multi-story buildings entirely. And one dramatic rescue captured a survivor being carried to safety using heavy machinery after being pulled from a flash flood at Trishuli in Nuwakot district. The response effort has been genuinely significant in scale, and it's worth understanding exactly what's been mobilized on both sides of the border. According to Xinhua, China's state-run news agency, Tibet government officials mobilized nearly 800 emergency workers and 150 vehicles specifically to support rescue efforts, alongside sniffer dogs and speedboats deployed to search the affected river valleys. Emergency supplies, including blankets, first aid kits, stretchers, and, in a genuinely sobering detail that reflects the scale officials themselves anticipated, body bags were specifically dispatched to the region. Now, let's talk about why this particular disaster happened, because understanding the underlying science genuinely matters here, and it connects directly to a broader, well-documented pattern researchers have been tracking across the entire Himalayan region for years. According to Alton Byers, a faculty research scientist at the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research at the University of Colorado Boulder, permafrost is thawing in the alpine zone specifically because of climate change, and that thawing directly destabilizes mountain slopes, making dangerous landslides, ice falls, and avalanches a growing risk to the communities living downstream. That's genuinely the core scientific mechanism behind this specific catastrophe. Permafrost, permanently frozen ground and rock that has historically held steep, high-altitude mountain slopes together like a kind of natural cement, is warming and thawing across the Himalayas as global temperatures rise. As that frozen binding material degrades, the rock and ice sitting on top of it becomes progressively less stable, genuinely more prone to exactly the kind of sudden, catastrophic collapse that struck Rasuwa this week. It's worth understanding the specific physics of what actually happened once that glacier collapse began, because it explains why the resulting flood was so genuinely devastating, and why it grew rather than dissipated as it moved downstream. Petley's own analysis addressed this directly, and he was careful to be scientifically precise about a specific detail worth understanding. There's no evidence that this was what's called a GLOF, a glacial lake outburst flood, meaning this specific disaster wasn't caused by a mountain lake of meltwater suddenly bursting through its natural dam, a genuinely common and separately documented Himalayan hazard. Instead, Petley described the water driving this debris flow as likely coming from a combination of sources: ice that converted directly to water as a result of the energy released during the initial collapse itself, water already embedded within the sediments and debris that got swept up and incorporated as the flow moved downstream, and ordinary river water already present in the valley's existing waterways. That combination, ice, embedded sediment moisture, and river water all merging together as the initial collapse cascaded downhill, is precisely what transformed a glacier failure high in the mountains into the kind of massive, valley-filling debris flow capable of destroying entire towns dozens of miles downstream from where the collapse itself actually began. Petley's own closing assessment of this disaster is genuinely worth including directly, because it reflects decades of accumulated expertise studying exactly this category of Himalayan hazard, and it carries real weight, given how directly it applies to what just happened. "I have made the point many times before," he wrote, "but we systematically underestimate the risk associated with these events in the Himalaya mountains." That's a genuinely significant, professionally candid statement from one of the field's most respected researchers, a direct acknowledgement that the scientific and emergency planning community has, for years, been aware that disasters exactly like this one represent a real, growing, and insufficiently addressed risk across this entire mountain range. Let's talk about the physical scale of destruction this event actually produced, because the infrastructure losses extend well beyond the immediate human toll. According to Petley's own assessment, the Girong border crossing, The critical trade and travel link connecting Tibet and Nepal, captured so dramatically in that viral security camera footage, has been completely destroyed. Houses across the affected valleys have been lost. At least 2 separate hydroelectric schemes along the Boat Kosi River were destroyed outright. A genuinely significant loss for a region that depends heavily on exactly this kind of small-scale hydroelectric infrastructure for its electricity supply. Roads, communication towers, and electrical infrastructure across the affected area were similarly wiped out, according to reporting on the disaster. Precisely the combination of losses that continues complicating rescue efforts even now, days after the initial collapse. It's worth understanding why researchers describe understanding a disaster like this one as requiring genuinely international scientific collaboration, because it reflects both the technical complexity involved and the fact that this event crossed an international border directly. According to Petley's own reporting, an international research team has now come together specifically to study this event in detail, following the same collaborative model that's been used to investigate similarly catastrophic Himalayan glacier and landslide events in recent years. That kind of dedicated, rapid response scientific investigation genuinely matters, both for understanding precisely what happened this week and for building a more accurate, evidence-based picture of exactly how much risk similarly unstable glaciers and slopes elsewhere across this same mountain range might currently carry. It's worth placing this disaster within the broader context of documented Himalayan glacier hazards, because Nepal specifically has a painful, well-documented history with exactly this category of catastrophic event. This region sits within one of the most geologically and glaciologically active mountain systems on the entire planet, home to the highest peaks on Earth, and to thousands of glaciers, many of which scientists have been directly monitoring for exactly this kind of instability risk for years, precisely because of the permafrost thaw mechanism Byers described. Rasua district itself, the epicenter of this week's disaster, sits along one of the most heavily trafficked trekking and border crossing corridors in the entire country, meaning a disaster striking this exact location was always going to carry genuinely significant risk to both local Nepali communities and the international trekking and tourism population that regularly passes through the region. Precisely the combination reflected in this week's confirmed casualty and missing figures. Let's talk about what comes next, because this remains a genuinely active, still unfolding disaster response, not a story with any resolution to report. Search and rescue operations continue across both the Nepali and Tibetan sides of the border, with the more than 1,000 people still reported missing representing the absolute priority for crews currently working through mud, debris, and destroyed infrastructure to locate any remaining survivors. Given how much time has already passed since the initial collapse, and given the genuinely severe physical destruction across the affected river valleys, officials themselves have not offered any specific, reassuring timeline for when that missing count might meaningfully decrease, or how many of those still unaccounted for may ultimately be confirmed among the disaster's fatalities. Nepal has not yet provided an overall figure for the total number of residents currently affected across the broader region, a detail that itself reflects just how difficult it remains to fully assess this disaster's true scope, while communication infrastructure across much of the affected area remains destroyed. It's worth understanding, too, what recovery genuinely looks like for a region that's just lost its primary border crossing, multiple hydroelectric facilities, and an unknown number of homes and roads, all within a single catastrophic morning. Rebuilding infrastructure at this scale, in genuinely remote, high-altitude terrain along an international border, represents a multi-year undertaking under the best of circumstances, one that will require sustained coordination between the Nepali and Chinese governments, international aid organizations, and the specific engineering expertise needed to rebuild safely in terrain that has just demonstrated, in the most catastrophic way possible, exactly how unstable it can genuinely be. So, pulling this entire story together, what's the honest, complete picture of what actually happened in the Himalayas this week and where things stand right now? On the morning of August 26, 2026, a glacier collapsed high in the mountains along the Nepal-Tibet border, an event initially misidentified as an earthquake before careful seismic and satellite analysis revealed the true cause. That collapse triggered a massive ice and rock debris flow that surged down the Lende, Potikoshi, and Trishuli river systems, obliterating the Gairong border crossing, destroying homes, bridges, and hydroelectric infrastructure, and sweeping through the mountain communities of Rasua district with almost no warning. As of the most recent count, at least 165 people have been confirmed dead, with more than 1,000 still reported missing, including hundreds of foreign tourists caught along one of the region's most heavily traveled trekking and border routes. Rescue efforts continue, complicated significantly by destroyed roads, downed communication infrastructure, and terrain rescue helicopters still can't safely access in some of the hardest hit areas. And researchers studying the disaster have directly connected its underlying cause to a well-documented worsening trend across the entire Himalayan region, permafrost thawing because of climate change, progressively destabilizing high-altitude slopes that were once held together by permanently frozen ground. A mechanism one of the field's leading researchers says the world has been systematically underestimating for years. For anyone with family or friends anywhere in the Rasua region, or anywhere else along this specific stretch of the Nepal-Tibet border, continue following updates directly from Nepal's National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority and official Chinese state channels for the most current, verified casualty and rescue information, given how rapidly these figures have continued changing throughout the response so far. If you have loved ones among the more than 1,000 people currently reported missing, continue working with both official government channels and your own country's embassy or consular services directly, particularly given how many foreign nationals remain unaccounted for as of this recording. This is a genuinely live, still unfolding humanitarian disaster, not a story with any resolution to offer. We'll continue tracking this disaster closely as search and rescue operations proceed, and as the true scope of both the human toll and the underlying glacial collapse becomes clearer through the ongoing international scientific investigation. Subscribe so you don't miss those updates, and if you have any connection to Nepal, Tibet, or the specific border region right now, please follow official channels directly rather than relying on secondhand reports. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.